Good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting us to speak about a project very close to our hearts, the People's Trial. So the People's Trial was funded by the HRB, and its aim is to support and develop the public's understanding of randomized trials in a novel and fun way, to learn about randomized trials, to understand why they matter, and to be better equipped to think critically about health claims. We are also very conscious that getting people to engage with and take part in clinical trials can be challenging, and we hope that the People's Trial will help trials in the future to be better designed and better implemented. So what we didn't know when we got started. Well, we wanted as many people as possible to get involved, not just as people who take part in trials, but as trialists. The People's Trial was truly designed by the people for the people. So what we didn't know when we started, well, we didn't know the trial question, what our intervention would be, what our comparator would be, what our outcomes would be, or how we would measure those outcomes, and really how we should report our findings. So as you can imagine, it meant our initial ethics application was very interesting. We believe the People's Trial has been very successful. Over 3,000 members of the public from 72 different countries took part in the People's Trial in all the different phases. The People's Trial was designed to be divided into 6 different phases, which we believe mimic and parallel the steps of a randomized control trial. These included question prioritization, study design, the conduct of the trial, and how we were going to let the world know at the very end what the results of the People's Trial were. We asked people to take part in each different phase of the trial independently, which meant that members of the public could drop in or drop out of the different phases of the People's Trial as worked for them and as they saw fit. So during the pre-launch, again, we wanted as many people as possible to take part, so we used a very broad social media campaign to create awareness of the People's Trial among different cultures, ethnicities, different backgrounds of people. We also created a fun, custom designed animation which explained each step of the trial as it progressed. For example, when you first went to the People's Trial, one of the first videos you saw was this video where Dr. Paul Wicks explains to the people why they should consider participating in the People's Trial.
Every day, we hear about exciting new medical breakthroughs, but we also hear controversy about which medicines are safe to take or worth paying for. It can be hard to make sense of health research. Healthcare professionals and scientists don't always communicate clearly, so if you or a loved one are diagnosed with a medical condition, you might find that health research is complicated, and it can be difficult to find easily understood, reliable information. But change is coming. We are a group of researchers here to help you learn about the most important tool that scientists have to figure out whether something is working or not: the randomized trial. A randomized trial is a form of research that compares groups of people receiving different things and looks at which of these improves health outcomes the most. We want to help you understand why randomized trials are important, what makes good health research, and also find out what you think is important to study. To do this, we need you to help design a study of your own. We call it the People's Trial. The People's Trial is a fun project where you will be involved in making decisions in all the major steps of a randomized trial. You'll be asked to think of questions we can answer, help us design the trial, take part in it, and decide the best way to share the results. The People's Trial is a new and exciting way to participate in scientific research. Help us to find the best ways to work together online while you learn about randomized trials and maybe even have some fun.
So during phase 1 of the People's Trial, we asked the public to give us questions that they thought the People's Trial could try to tackle. We provided sample questions like this one here. I would like to find out if eating cheese makes a difference to having nightmares in comparison to not eating cheese. And we use this as a way to guide people. We only accepted low-risk, non-health related fun questions, and we did this to make sure the trial was as accessible as possible to all. During this phase, the public submitted 155 potential questions for the People's Trial to try and answer. In phase 2, we asked people to prioritise the questions that were identified in phase 1, and 758 members of the public took part. In the People's Trial, we developed surveys to investigate how little or how much the public liked each question submitted to us. And using this online iterative process, the public chose the question the People's Trial would try to tackle. Again, a good question is one that the people want to answer. And so the people chose, does reading a book in bed make a difference to sleep in comparison to not reading a book in bed? During phase 3, we have our question, and now it's time to think about how we should answer that question. So in this phase, we ask the public to determine the characteristics of the intervention: reading a book, the comparator, not reading a book, and the outcome, sleep. Again, we developed an animated video to describe the importance of this step in the trial design. And following much deliberation, the public decided that if you were randomized to reading a book in bed, that meant that for the duration of the study, so for 7 days, you should sleep in your own bed, in your own home. You should go to bed and wake up at the same time as you normally would. You should read a book immediately before trying to go to sleep for 15 to 30 minutes. And you shouldn't eat food or caffeinated drinks within 1 hour of going to bed. Interestingly enough, the public decided that the use of electronic entertainment or communication devices such as mobile phones or tablets were permitted in bed. So the only difference between the intervention group reading a book in bed and the comparator group not reading a book in bed was that in the comparator group, you were not to read a book immediately before trying to go to sleep. Everything else was exactly the same. You were to sleep in your own bed, in your own home. You were to go to bed and wake up at the same time as you normally would. You were not to eat food or caffeinated drinks within 1 hour of bed. And again, you could use mobile phones or tablets. Phase 4, we're getting to the exciting bit. During this phase, we asked people to take part in the People's Trial Randomized Control Trial, and we called this trial the Reading Trial. To take part, you just needed to be 18 years of age or older. And again, in this phase, we used a fun animated video. Within this phase, people were randomized or placed into the intervention group, reading a book in bed, or the control group, not reading a book in bed. Who got what was completely by chance, which meant that everyone had an equal chance of being in the intervention group or in the control group. In this video, Professor Sean Tariq explains why randomization, a cornerstone of randomized control trials, is so important and just why researchers get so excited about it.
Why do researchers get excited about the idea of randomization in trials? In everyday life, we probably often say, well, that's a bit random, and we don't generally mean that in a good way. It hardly sounds like the basis of a solid healthcare evaluation system. But what randomization allows us to do in trials is create groups of people who are alike apart from the treatment being tested. And we would decide whether a person was in group A or group B by chance, in other words, randomly. And why is that so important? Well, there are lots of things that might affect the outcome we are interested in our trial. Let's say it was pain. And we could in principle try and predict or correct how those factors would affect our outcome and do something about it. But there are lots of things that might affect our outcome, and we will never know what those things are. And the only way of spreading those things evenly across our groups is to do allocation to group A or group B randomly. So at the end of the process, we have groups that are indeed alike in everything except the treatment they have received. And that's why we get so excited about randomization in trials.
Finally, during phase 5, we ran the reading trial. Again, we wanted as many people as possible to help us tackle the question by taking part in the reading trial. And so we used a very broad social media campaign to ask people to take part. And in December of 2019, 991 people agreed to take part. Although we tried to use plain language throughout the people's trial, for the methodologists here, the reading trial was an online, parallel group, randomized control trial conducted with no face-to-face interaction. And now I'd like to hand you over to Professor Declan Devane to hear the results of the reading trial.
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you for the opportunity to present the findings of the reading trial. So Elaine has given a very nice overview of the different steps in the people's trial within which the reading trial was conducted. The findings of the reading trial were that we had 991 people who agreed to take part in the trial to help tackle the question, does reading a book in bed make a difference to sleep compared with not reading a book? And of those 991, half were randomized to the intervention group of reading a book in bed, and half were randomized to the control group, that is, not reading a book in bed. And randomized and allocation to both groups was by a process of randomization, meaning that each participant of the trial had an equal unknown chance of being allocated to either the intervention or the control group. Not everybody who was randomized completed the trial, and in our study, 25% of people randomized to reading a book in bed, and about 18% of people randomized to not reading a book in bed didn't finish the trial. This isn't unusual in trials. We try very hard to retain people who agree to join a trial to completion of the trial and to reporting of the outcomes. But often that doesn't happen in trials. It is something we need to improve. It is a source of waste in research, and it is an area of research where we need better quality evidence to help us, to help inform decisions about what we can do to ensure that people, or to maximize the likelihood of people staying in trials. So in many ways, our trial didn't differ hugely from many trials in terms of this aspect called retention, but it is something that all trials, including this trial, need to do better. The people who took part in the people's trial were, on average, similar in their age, their gender, and their understanding of randomized trials, and in whether or not they worked in healthcare, and importantly, in their sleep quality at the beginning of the trial. We looked at each participant in both arms to see how many improved their sleep quality, how many had no change to the sleep quality, and how many had a worse sleep quality from the start to the finish of the trial. Overall, we found that reading a book in bed before going to sleep improved sleep quality. 42% of people in the reading a book in bed group felt their sleep improved, compared to only 28% of people in the not reading a book in bed group. So quite a big difference. So we wanted to check to see, was that finding simply because there were other differences between the groups? We took into account how we measured sleep quality in the people's trial, as well as the influence of the initial sleep quality reported by people in both groups, the gender, age, knowledge of clinical trials, and whether or not they worked in healthcare. And we looked at that across both groups, taking into consideration what we found, and we found that our result couldn't be explained by these characteristics of the participants. This means that we can now make a reliable claim that in people similar to those who took part in this trial, that reading a book in bed before sleeping, in the manner done in this trial, which Elaine has explained, has a positive effect on quality of sleep compared to not reading a book in bed. Given that the public were responsible for all phases of this trial, we also want the public to tell us how should we report the findings of the trial. So we conducted an online survey and we asked the participants who took part in the reading trial to rank in order of importance how and where they would like to see the results of the trial publicized. We had 612 people take part across 47 countries, and what they told us has informed and will continue to inform how we are sharing the findings of the People's Trial. The public told us that they wanted the results of the People's Trial shared across a whole spectrum of areas. They wanted them shared in the People's Trial website, on YouTube, on social networking sources, on online blogs. And only 20% of people said they wanted them shared in traditional sources, including print, newspapers, TV, media, radio, etc. So the message here for us was that people want these shared across a wide variety of areas. We delved a little bit further and asked the public how do they want them shared. And a striking feature for us with this finding is that over 2/3 of people told us that they wanted the findings shared either visually as charts or graphs, or as plain language summaries, or as animated videos. In addition, 18% said they wanted it shared by audio. So only 16% of people said they would like it shared by detailed report. And detailed report is often one of the primary means or modes we have of sharing the findings of a trial. So I think there are lessons for those of us who plan, design, conduct, and report trials. In terms of engagement and involvement of the public in the People's Trial overall, the website recorded over 9,000 unique users with almost 15,000 sessions and over 24,000 page views. So quite good engagement. Reflecting the makeup of the steering group, perhaps, visitors to the site were predominantly from Ireland and the UK. Overall, 46% of the users were female and 54% were male. The majority of participants, 61%, were within the 18 to 34 year age range, with just 6% of users aged 55 years or older. The People's Trial website is accessible. It remains accessible, and we will continue to maintain it as an unrestricted public access website where all of the resources that were used for each stage of the People's Trial are available for people to view. We also have used that website as a means of sharing the findings of each stage of the People's Trial. And as the public have asked us, we will also share these findings on that website. So all that remains for me to do is just to thank a few people, and I'll be very brief. 3 big thanks. Our first thanks to our steering group, who jumped in feet first into the deep end of this project and joined in supporting the People's Trial and worked with us for every stage and every phase of the People's Trial as we worked with the public to plan, design, conduct, and report the People's Trial. Thank you all. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with this group of people. We've had some really good fun along the way, and I think we should be proud of the People's Trial, as I hope the public are. I'd like to thank the Health Research Board, who've been a supporter of the Health Research Board Trial Methodology Research Network and other initiatives we run, including Evidence Synthesis Ireland and Cochrane Ireland. I want to thank them in particular for their flexibility and for giving us the opportunity to try and do something a little bit different, and for having faith that we could pull it off. Thank you. And finally, I'd like to thank the public. I want to thank the public who took part in each phase of the People's Trial, the public who took part in the reading trial within the People's Trial, those of you who shared the different surveys in the People's Trial, families who discussed the People's Trial. We do know there's a lot of discussion amongst adults and children around. We had a lot of families tell us that their children wanted to recommend or submit questions that we would answer in the People's Trial. So there's lots more work we could do here at the People's Trial. Some of that work we look forward to kicking off. And thank you for the opportunity to share the People's Trial with you and the findings of the reading trial within that.